and all of the other kind of things that are on the commission list, and they earned some money, and Stacy took them to the dollar store, and they picked out a gift for all of the people that were on their list. They picked out the gift. We didn't discourage one way or the other. They took that gift, they took it home, they wrapped it, and then they gave that gift to the person or the couple of people that they were shopping for. And can I tell you, on Christmas Day, that was the best 15 minutes of the season. Because there is something special about giving something to somebody when you've worked for it and you've earned it. And I'm giving you a gift not because it's money that mommy and daddy gave me, but I'm giving you a gift because I sacrificed in order to be able to do this. And I wrapped it, and it's ugly, and it's got way too many tape, and it's still got the price tag on it, and all the things that are wrong with the gift. But Grandma and Grandpa and I got one, and Stacy got one, and man, they were thrilled to give it, and we were thrilled to get it. Now, don't get me wrong. I told you back in December that I was getting a stick welder because the mailman just threw it out the window into our front yard, and I saw it. And so I got a stick welder. Back at Father's Day, I got a plasma cutter, and so I've been cutting things apart and sticking them back together, or I have been breaking things and putting them together wrong and then re-breaking them and then trying to fix it. It's been amazing. I love to get stuff. I love to get a gift, but I also love to give, and there's something about giving, and there's a little piece on the inside of us when you get to give to somebody like that. Man, doesn't it give you a little bit of peace? Doesn't it give you like a sense of pride to be able to give something to somebody? I mean, think about the big gift. Maybe if you have kids, think about the big gift that you gave to your kids this year. Man, they open that thing up, or they open that envelope and it's got that cash, or it's got those tickets for that trip, or they open the box and it's got a tablet or a computer or whatever the thing is that you got them. And on the inside of you, man, there's a little bit of pride that goes along with that, isn't it? I mean, we like to give. We like that feeling that goes along with it. And there's something oddly spiritual about it too, isn't it? Isn't there something oddly spiritual about being able to give to people? And I think that feeling that's on the inside of us, I think that's actually the thumbprint of God in your life. So what do we know? Genesis tells us this. Genesis 1, verse 27, it says, so God created mankind in what? In His own image. You look like God. You should look in the mirror and say, man, I look good. God looks good. God looks good on me. You are made in the image of God. In the image of God, He created them, male and female. He created them. Now watch this. What else do we know? The most famous verse in the Bible. We talked about it on Christmas Eve. You ready? For God so loved the world that He what? That He gave. You are built in the image of God. You are made, you are created in the image of God, and God is a giver. God loves to give to people. And so when you and I give, when we wrap up that Christmas gift and we give it to somebody, and there's that pride and that peace and that joy that goes along with that, that is the thumbprint of God in your life. And so here's the big takeaway. You ready? We're never more like God than when we're giving. We are never more like God than when we're giving. You may not have a blank for that. That's okay. Giving our time to serve people, giving our skills, the things that we're good at to help people, giving our emotion, giving our resources to help God's work go farther. Now, here's why I'm talking about this, because I think you're probably like me, except you're a little more normal than I am. But don't you think down inside somewhere you want to be a giver? We all want to be the crazy aunt and uncle that all the kids love because you walk into the house and you slip everybody a $10 bill. Anybody have an aunt or an uncle like that? I do. Like the first time he walked up and put his hand in my pocket, I was like screaming, bloody murder, okay? And then I realized, hey, there's money in here after this, okay? You could put $10 in my back pocket any day, you know what I'm saying? Like we all want to be that crazy aunt and uncle that's just, we're just givers, and we like that. We all want our life to count for something aside from clothes and a car and a nice house and kids that grow up to not be serial killers. That was a joke. It's okay to laugh. Okay, good. We all want our life to count for something. And that part of you that wants those things to count, I think that's the image of God in you. So today's title for the talk today, we're going to talk about the kink in the hose. Anybody ever have a water hose that gets all knotted up? And then you get that one kink in it that's right up here by the spigot where you hold it so you end up squeezing it and you're holding the trigger and you know what I mean? You know exactly what I'm talking about, okay. We had one of those growing up that was outside of our house, and my parents were usually pretty good about at the beginning of fall or end of fall, beginning of winter, they'd go out there and they'd pick all the stuff up and they'd put it in the storeroom or whatever. Well, there was a water hose that got missed one time, and it laid at the end of the house all winter. And so I went out there. It was in the spring, and we were outside doing something, and I wanted to drink. And anybody grow up drinking out of a garden hose? Okay, look at all the hands, brain damage, okay? Like you can just point to this and just exclaim. And so I went out there, I turned the water hose on, I put the water hose on the end of my mouth, and you know what I got? A mouthful of acorns. Some smart squirrel decided they were going to put his acorns in the end of the water hose. And so this thing had a big kink in it, and I'm out here just unkinking it, and I got one end of my mouth, and I'm pulling this thing, and all of a sudden it's just like a mouth of marbles. It was absolutely insane. But we all know about that water hose that gets a kink in it, and you can't get the kink out. So we're going to talk about the kink in the hose. But first I need to ask you a question. Where's my nerds at? How many of you would say, I'm a nerd? Okay, everybody breaks down into one of two sets of people, okay? Nerds and free spirits. And opposites attract. So if you're married and you're not one, you're attracted to the other one that's not like you, right? Okay, so everybody has to play along. Do you ready? One of you's a nerd and one of you's a free spirit, and if you're single, you get to pick, okay? How many of you are nerds? Represent, all right? Yeah, I are a nerd, okay? Like you see a spreadsheet and you just immediately just want to like lay down on it and just write notes, and you're like, yeah, this is awesome. I don't know what these numbers are, but I can make a chart like a champ, all right? Okay, so the nerds. How many of you are free spirits? You woke up 3 days last week and you don't know what day it is, okay? Right, okay. Look, you raised your hand. You're still paying attention, gold star. So we can be divided into nerds and into free spirits, and I fall in the category of nerds. And one of the reasons I love talking about money is A, because I'm a nerd, and B, because it's one of those topics that we all need to talk about, because we know that most marriage fights hinge off of talking about money. And in case you didn't know this about me, my background is in business administration. I worked as a financial coach at a church. I have a master's degree in theology, and after I graduated from seminary, one of the things Stacy and I did was we served at a church, and we counseled people financially. Now, I know you're looking at me thinking, okay, this dude's crazy, okay? Well, yeah. But what we learned over that course of time is that more people struggle with money fights, money issues, money arguments than almost any other topic that exists. So that's one of the reasons that I love to talk about this. Now, if you're here and you're thinking, man, I'm uncomfortable. Man, this guy's going to talk about money. I'm going to have to get my checkbook out and write it. No, okay? Just have to take a deep breath. All right. Because we're going to talk about God's and Grandma's ways with money. Any of you have a crazy grandma that said you need to save for a rainy day, right? Yeah, okay, you got that grandma. Okay, Grandma was right. You say, well, you should be more positive. I am positive it's going to rain. Okay, so Grandma's got some good advice, and so does God. Because you read the Bible, there's only one topic that Jesus talked about more in his earthly ministry than money, and it was love. The second thing that Jesus talks about more than, just right below love, was money. Why? Because where your treasure is, there your heart is also. And if you are in love with money, Matthew says, it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. In our culture, we say the love of money is the root of all evil. No, you're misquoting Scripture. That's not what it says. Money's amoral. It doesn't have good or bad. It's what we choose to do with it. And so the love of money is the root of all evil. I'm off track. Here we go. Back on topic. So here's what we know. Here's a couple things. Number one, 77% of college graduates will graduate with student loan debt. The average college student will graduate with $30,000 in student loan debt. And some of you are going, oh, thank Lord, I got $29,000. I'm beating the average. And some of you are like, man, I had $89,000 here. I made up the gap, okay? Like, I got it, all right? So you may not be the average, but the average college student, think about it, 3 out of 4, there I am with my numbers, see spreadsheets. 3 out of 4 college students graduate with a big giant noose around their neck financially. And then we look and we wonder why there are so many problems with marriages, and why there are so many problems with relationships, and why there's so much struggle, and why there's so much stress, and why there's so much chaos, because we get out of college and we hit the real world, and the real world hits you, and you've got this payment that you've got to make to people that's got a big giant house with big marble pillars, and their house is bigger than yours, and it's prettier, and they got little mints on the inside, and all this stuff. You owe them money every stinking month, and we wonder why we have a problem. 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Almost 4 out of 5 live paycheck to paycheck, and 55% of us are concerned about it. Hello. 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck means if you get laid off, if you get sick and can't go to work this week, or for whatever reason, you live paycheck to paycheck, you cannot make the ends meet, and half of us are concerned about it. That means there's another 30% of people, they're probably the free spirits, just like, whatever. All right, so you're just out there, we're out there doing our own thing. 45% of marriages end in divorce. And of that, half of those are because of money fights, money issues, money problems, money struggles. It's one of those things that we have got to talk about, because we can talk to you about having a great marriage, but unless we talk about how to handle your resources the way that God teaches and the way that Grandma used to teach us how to do, if we don't learn how to do those things, then we've short-circuited the process of what we need to know to have a good relationship and to follow Jesus in a way that matters. So there's a good thing that God has a lot to say about money, and the fact of the matter is money matters. Money matters. And it doesn't matter how much money you have. What matters more is what you do with what you have. And so the takeaway is, what do you do with money matters more than how much you have. Because there are some of us sitting in here and we don't make a whole lot. And there are others of us sitting in here and you make a whole lot. This is not a discussion on who makes more and who makes less, and they make $12.50 an hour and I make $25 an hour, or vice versa. That doesn't matter. That's not going to factor into this discussion at all. Because what God is most interested in is not how much you have, but what you're doing with what you have. Are you following me? Say yes. So there's only 3 things that you can do with money, and I learned this from my grandfather. There's only 3 things that you can do with money. You can give it, you can save it, and you can live off of it. Really, if you think about it, everything that you do with money falls into one of those 3 categories. We can give it, we can save it, and we can live off of it. And to be financially balanced, we need to be doing all 3 of those things, and dare I say we should be doing them in that order. I've talked about this several times before, and a lot of times I have said we need to live off, or we need to spend, save, and give. Spend, save, and give. Spend, save, and give. And the more I read, the more I realized, now wait a minute, God talks about us giving back to Him, and if I'm not going to be faithful with what He's given me, then how in the world am I going to make the rest of this work out? And I can tell you, and this is not the crux of this talk, so you can take a deep breath now. Stacy and I started giving regularly right after we got married. And I can tell you that before we figured out the money thing, before we figured out that God owns it all and we should honor Him by giving back to Him that first percentage of what we make, our money didn't go very far. When my car broke, not only did I have a broken car, I had a financial crisis. My life was in crisis. It was like, my car's broke and so am I. And we constantly struggled. And I can tell you that when we're faithful to God, and it happens in our own life, like if you, we'll share this story another day, but God will make the 90% go further than you can make the 100% go by yourself. And that's what we're talking about today with the kink in the host. So I want to read you several verses, and I want to unpack an illustration with this giant monstrosity of tubes that I glued together from the Home Depot. Say amen. All right. I go in Home Depot at least twice a day, and they always look at me because I've got a buggy full of stuff that I'm surprised they haven't sent me to the FBI and just told, okay, this guy bought a box of nails, 3 feet of pipe, and some glue. Like I'm on a watch list somewhere, okay? Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 14. It says this. It says, look, the highest heavens and the earth and everything in it belongs to the Lord your God. So what we have here is we have a fish tank from Walmart. And this is our illustration. Look at the highest heavens and the earth and everything in it. And what does the pink part say? They all belong to the Lord. Everything you have, hashtag God owns it. God owns everything. So everything you see, everything that you have, God owns it. And so that's going to be represented by our fish tank down here on the bottom. God owns everything. And then look at what he says back a couple of verses before. Deuteronomy 8:18. Remember the Lord your God. He is the one who what? Who gives you the power to produce wealth. The skills that you have that you can go and have a job and make money, those are not yours. Those are on loan from God. And so we have a God who has everything. He owns everything. Everything that you have belongs and is owned by God. And then God looks at you, he looks at your life, and he says, you know what? I'm going to take this piece of pipe, and I'm going to create an avenue to take the resources that I have, and I'm going to put them into your life. And how does he do that? He does that by work. He gives us the power to produce wealth. My dad taught me this growing up. Work, it's a surefire money-making scam. You need money? Go to work. Right? And so God gives us the ability to do the things that we have to do, and also, I would say, a responsibility to do what you can with what you've got to take care of yourself and your family. And so God owns everything, and then he gives us the power to produce wealth. And then this is us here. This is the spigot, all right? So this is where the resources come into our life. And if we turn the pump on, if we have a bunch of knots, 1 knot, 2 knot, 10 knots, what happens? Just a little bit of water comes out of there. Now, if you bypass the knot, look how much water comes out of that. So what happens in our life financially when we don't do things God ways, and when we think, okay, I can figure this out myself? Okay, I've got a money problem. I've got a crisis in my life, so I'm just going to go out and I'm going to put this on the credit card because I didn't really save any money for it. And so, you know, the kids are going to go to college, and now the car's broke, and all of a sudden, oh, one of them got married, and boy, we didn't see that coming 18 years ago. And so, you know, we wind up with something like this, and oh, now the kids need braces, and before you know it, your financial life looks like this. And what happens every time you tie a knot in the water hose? What happens? You restrict the flow of water out of the end of the pipe. And some of us are standing at the end of our financial life. We're looking at our bank statement at the end of the month, and we have more month than we have money when we get down to the end. And we're looking at the end of the water hose like this, and we're getting mad at God when we're the fools that have tied the knots in the rope. We've tied the knots in the hose. Do you follow me? And I'm not calling you a fool. I'm talking to myself, okay? We're the people, we're the ones that have tied the knots in the hose, and then we get mad at God and say, God, you haven't provided for me. And God's like, really? I own everything. And I've given you the ability to produce wealth and for you to take those resources and do something meaningful with it. And you have tied knots in the hose, and you're looking at the end and going, God, why? And God's going, you need to untie the knot. You need to untie the knot, because what happens when there's a knot in the hose here? You know what happens to the rest of the hose? Pressure. Pressure builds up behind that water hose. Have you ever felt financial pressure? You know what that feels like. I do. God called Stacey and I to plant a church in Brandon, Mississippi. We left a church where we had insurance, and as soon as we left that church, we found out our daughter was deaf. She had a hearing problem. Wait, God. Are you sure that we shouldn't have found this out before we left our insurance? I understand what pressure is. But here's also what I understand. God's faithful. And if you're somebody that's walked with Jesus very long, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you haven't walked with Jesus very long, just hang tight. You'll find it out. Because God is faithful. Even when we tie knots in the hose and we limit and we restrict God's faith, God's resources flowing through our life, even when we do that, do you know that God is still capable But here's what we need to discover the next couple of weeks. How do we untie these knots? Because I don't know about you, but I want God to look at my life and go, there's a water hose I can use. If there's a fire over there in Pelahatchie, or somebody's house gets flooded, I know the guy to call who can give some money, who can make it right. I want to be that person, and I know you do too. Because we all said a while ago, we want to be givers. We want to be the crazy aunt and uncle that have the resources to give somebody a $10 bill just because they showed up to the family reunion. Like, the bar's low, people. It's low. But we want to be able to do those things. And the more knots are in the hose, the more pressure we have in our life, and the fewer and fewer and fewer resources end up at the bottom of the hose. Remember, it's not how much you have, it's what you do with what you have. And so God has placed those resources in our possession. What should we do with them? What should we do with the resources God has given us? Really, we can only do three things. We can give it, we can save it, and we can live off of it. And we should be doing all three of those things. God is faithful to us even when we don't deserve it. God is always deserving. He wants us to be faithful. What does faithful mean? Faithful means to be steadfast. It means when He looks at you and He looks at me, He knows what He's going to get when He asks us to do something. If God asked you to do something and you say yes over and over and over again, God looks at you and goes, faithful. I found somebody who will do what I asked them to do. Look at what 1 Corinthians 4:2 says. It says, now a person who is put in charge as a manager must be found faithful. We must be found faithful. So if God owns everything and He gives us the power to produce wealth, He transfers those resources into our care. God's expectation from us is that we be faithful. Now, which one of these two water hoses, and I should have cut this one longer, y'all. I got a problem. Which one of these two water hoses do you think is doing what it was designed to do? The one that's allowing the water to flow through it, or the one that's got a knot in it and it's just kind of barely trickling? Yeah, it's the one that allows the water to flow through it, because that's the way the water hose is designed. That's what it's designed to do, and that's what God designed you and me to do. We all want to be better givers. We all know that we need to save some for a rainy day, and we all know that we need to live off of it, right? Like, we like to eat and have a car and live indoors where it's dry and warm. We all like to, be able to provide things for our kids. And part of taking care of your family and yourself is learning to spend on some priorities. And this is one of the things we're going to unpack next week. But if you're sitting here and you're like, man, I got like Discover, American Express, and all these places, they're like calling me today. What do I do? There's a couple of things that, as a responsible, faithful steward that's taking care of your family, you need to take care of: food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and utilities. Before you pay like the next dime on a Discover card, you need to make sure that your family is cared for and taken care of. Now, I'm not saying that you should live in McMansion and owe $300 million in, okay, you can't continue to spend more money than you make. You're not in Congress. That's not how this thing works. But we need to have priorities: food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and utilities, and that's what we're going to talk about next week. But God owns everything. He gives us the ability to produce wealth, and He asks that we be faithful. But the problem is not that God is not doing His part. The problem so often is we're not doing our part. And we're tying knots in the hose, and we're making decisions that probably aren't the best, but they're good in the moment. And what we do when we do that is we take God's will for us, and we take it and we tie it in a knot. If something happens in our life and we haven't prepared and we haven't saved and we haven't done the things that we need to do to be able to provide for our family, and then that moment of crisis, that moment of contention comes, and then we run out and we try to fix it on our own, we have taken that part of our life out of God's hands, and we've taken back control over it. Remember what I said earlier about when Stacy and I learned when we gave to God faithfully, that 90% went a whole lot further than the 100% that we were trying to do on our own? And that's been so true. When we try to fix those things on our own, we take them out of God's hands. And we make one bad decision after another, and before you know it, there's so many kinks in the hose that there's very little for us to live off of, much less even be able to save some or to give some and to help somebody else. So what happens when you kink the hose? There's pressure. We've all dealt with financial pressure. Anybody ever bought something that you felt like you had to hide from your spouse? Not a good plan, just for the longevity of life and relationships and your overall happiness, okay? That's not a good thing, not a good thing to do. Anybody ever had concerns about paying the light bill? Have you ever had a marriage fight over the bank statement or credit card statement that comes after Christmas? You spent what? Right? Like some of you are already practicing that question because you know it's coming. And there's that stress and that struggle and that tension. Ever wonder what would happen if you got sick and you missed a paycheck? Yeah, we all have. Because we're all human. And that's something that we struggle with and something that we worry with and something that is concerning to us. We've all made stupid financial decisions. I mean, let's just be honest. I've made stupid financial decisions with zeros on the end of it, okay? I call it dumb. I've done dumb with zeros behind it. But the awesome thing is God is still faithful. And you're sitting there thinking, man, I've made some dumb decisions. Yeah, you probably have, but hey, you're here, and that's a good one. Gold star. Because I believe God wants to do something in your life and in my life and in our life collectively. When we recognize that God owns everything and He transfers that to us, He gives us the power to produce wealth. Man, you have a set of skills that you can do that is amazing. And you just think, well, I'm just a guy that works at a thing, or I'm just a girl that works in a cube, and I just answer the phone and say hello and how you doing and whatever. No, God's given you a set of skills so that you can provide the resources that your family needs. And bonus, He puts you with a group of people who need to see somebody who can follow Jesus. You with me? And so God gives you those things for a reason. And I'm not saying that you need to go to your cube tomorrow and just take your Bible and start beating people on the forehead. Not a good life plan for longevity of employment. But people need to see that what we talk about and what we teach and what we live actually works. So the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk frankly about how to get out of debt and how to stay out of debt, how to get your family on the same page. Stacy and I once a month have a budget meeting. And oddly enough, she puts the budget together. She's a nerd too. She's a hot nerd, but she's a nerd. And so she puts together, and we have a budget meeting. And one of the rules of our budget meeting is I have to change something. And that's usually when I say, we're spending what on hair and nails? And that's when she looks at me and said, you spent how much at Harbor Freight? And I'm like, good deal, congratulations. We've made a bargain. We're talking about how to get your family on the same page and how to make our money count. We all want to leave something behind that lives beyond the scope of our life. Don't you? I mean, I don't want to just poof and be gone and that be the end. I want somebody to miss me when I'm gone. Not because of my great humor and my suave good looks. But because, yeah, thanks for laughing. That was a good joke. But because I did something that mattered, and I know you want to do that too. So how do we give, save, and live financially balanced lives? That's what we're going to talk about next week. Some people would pay hundreds or thousands, even millions of dollars to come to a seminar like this, but you're going to get it for the low, low price of absolutely free. One of the other things that we learned that we know is that 10% of people that make over, there it is, thanks. Hey, good, keep it up. 10% of people making $100,000 can't make ends meet. What? You give me $100,000, I would be skinny, I would have hair, I would be driving a nice car. Like, I would not have trouble making ends meet. But so it doesn't matter how much water hose you have, how much water you have coming in the hose. Are you following me? Because people that make $100,000, there's still some of them that can't make it meet. And they're not using a water hose. Their hose is like the size of a fire hose. But they're still tying knots in it too. So it's not an amount of resource thing. It's a behavior thing. It's a heart thing. Because where your treasure is, there your heart is also. Where's your treasure? Where's my treasure? You look at my checkbook, you would think my treasure is at Harbor Freight or Home Depot, because I'm always there trying to dig it out. But where's your treasure? Where is your heart? You may be here today and you say, well, I already knew there was a kink in the hose. I already knew there was a problem. Thanks for pointing it out. You made me feel good about myself today. I'm so glad that I came to church. I mean, there are some of us that are thinking that, but the first step towards being on the right path, let me see if I can say this like Stacy would say it. You don't say there's a problem, because that brings